Welcome back to episode 3 of Matt and Eric Talk Twins. Today we kind of have some more news than we did last week. A lot of it just coming out of the GM meetings, so we'll talk about that, general direction, and some potential trades for the Twins. I'm Matt.
And I'm Eric.
And we'll get right into it. So the big news coming out of the week is that the Twins aren't looking to further tear down their roster. Dan Hayes of The Athletic had an article where he talked about how Falvey said that they are going to continue to look to build on this current roster. They're not currently in trade talks with Joe Ryan and Pablo Lopez. And they're going to try to compete in the AL Central. And I guess, Eric, what are your thoughts on that? Do we think that the Twins have a viable route to competing this year, or do we think that this is just prolonging the inevitable?
I mean, it's kind of a tough call, right? Because for the past few years, it feels like the AL Central has been very much an open season type of beginning, where I think that every year we come into it saying we got a lot of teams that tell us they're trying, that are probably going to be an 85 to 90 win team. And I don't really foresee that being any different from or going into next year. I think the Tigers are likely opening as the division favorites, as they should. I still don't like them to be anything more than like a high 80s, low 90s win total unless they make a major addition. And they also have the looming Tariq Skubal contract issue that they also have to deal with, which a lot of fans don't want to hear it if you're a Tigers fan, could very easily end up in a trade. So I think that the path to a division title is still there, but the Twins have got to be looking really optimistically and spending really optimistically this offseason if they're actually going to put themselves back right into division contention.
Yeah, I mean, to frame it a different way, the Twins finished 17 games behind the Tigers last year, and I don't know that that was with half a season of all the guys that they trade away at the deadline. That's with a functional bullpen for most of the year, which is not currently the case. Uh, so I don't know. I think the Twins could battle back to being like a 500 team. Maybe they get to like 83, 84 wins and be on the fringe of a wild card spot. But that would require a lot of things going right. I think that would mean that Jenkins and Erod are both producing in the big leagues and are big parts of our offense. Probably Kalen Culpepper as well. And a bunch of these high minors arms successfully transitioning to the bullpen. Because also, I just don't see the Twins saying, hey, we have $40 million to spend this offseason. We're going to go sign a first baseman. We're going to go sign some pitchers. Like, I think theoretically that's something they could do, and they could bolster this roster pretty quickly in free agency. But, like, I just am not sure that I see the Pohlads doing that, especially because it sounds like their ownership situation is still pretty uncertain. They haven't formally announced their new minority owners. We don't know what kind of money they're bringing in, if they're going to try to compete right away. It's just all really uncertain. And so I think my confidence in them actually spending money this offseason is waning.
I will, in a rebuttal to that, say that, as we talked earlier, Derek Falvey definitely knows that his career is on the line a little bit, at least with the Twins. And in the past, where it kind of feels like the Pohlads have just came to Falvey and given him a number. I know last season he talked about how he had to nickel and dime with them just to find the $3 million we needed to sign Harrison Bader. I think we could see a more aggressive Derek Falvey this offseason, managing, dealing for his job, who's going to kind of push the buttons on the Pohlads and fight for the team's sake to get as much money on this roster as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I'll put it this way. Like, right now, the Twins' projected payroll for next year is right around $95 million, but that's with like $4.7 million going to Trevor Larnach in arbitration, which we've talked about. I don't think he's going to be on the roster next year. So they have, I mean, if we're going up to like 2023 levels, that would give them roughly $60 million. They're not going to go up that high. But even if they're just back to where they were last year for payroll at the start of the year, that gives them $40 million. And I'll say for $40 million, that's enough to sign a real impact bat at first base and two or three functional relievers. And I think that's enough to make them interesting. But I mean, I think they're going to be at like 110. At which point, it's like, who can you even sign that's going to do anything?
That $40 million number is really tantalizing, because when you hear that, my mind immediately goes to one Peter Alonso back into free agency. We already have heard Scott Boras talk in length about him doing his Scott Boras thing. He's gonna drag out Alonso's free agency. He's already talked about there being a plethora of teams that are interested. I think that would be a nice one to dream on, but I really like just the idea of, yeah, filling the back end of the bullpen with the money we have. And I think that's a very realistic goal, especially if, as we've kind of been alluded to as well in the GM meetings, that Pablo and Joe Ryan might both still be with the Twins next year.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the only viable path to contention is if they do bring in a first baseman. I don't think you can go into a season with Cody Clemens as your primary option at the most offensive minded position in the sport and be like, yeah, he's going to be good enough to win us a division. He's going to be good enough to be a first division regular. I think if they don't bring in an outside addition at first, I'm not confident that they're going to have a winning season.
What type of addition does that look like to you, though? Is Paul Goldschmidt a big enough first baseman acquisition to say, yeah, we're in this thing now?
No, I'm thinking more along the lines of, well, first of all, I don't think they're going to get Pete, and I don't think they're going to get like a Josh Naylor. But one guy who is an impact bat who should be available on a shorter term deal that I have not heard too much steam about after kind of a slow finish to the year. It's Eugenio Suarez. He'd be a right-handed thumper, plug him right into the middle of the lineup, and he's probably looking at a 3-year deal in free agency. I think that would be interesting, but again, that would require a pretty sizable commitment for them.
Also, not, I guess, the most familiar with Suarez. Did Gino have first base experience under his belt? I thought he was primary third.
Yeah, he's played both, but he plays a lot more third. But I mean, if we have Royce over there, we can just move him to first.
Exactly. And we talking about moving guys to first, we touched on it earlier this week. Matt Wallner, also potential option at first base. I Obviously, we haven't heard anything about Matt Wallner playing there yet, but it's something that he did in college that he would profile very well offensively at. And I think that just kind of shows that there's a lot of options if our goal is just to get a big bat in at first base to fill that in a competitive manner with the budget we have.
Yeah, I would agree because especially if you move Wallner to first, you could then by midseason have both Erod and Jenkins in the corners and still keep the DH spot open for whoever needs a day off, which I think would be good, especially because like Buxton gets a decent amount of DH time. There's definitely times where you'd prefer not to have Luke Keeschel playing defense, so I think that would be an intriguing possibility. But again, like the Twins have shown no willingness to move him or Larnach to the infield, even though they've had a logjam of left-handed hitting corner outfielders and no decent first baseman for like the last 5 years.
So Larnick is another interesting one to me. We haven't really touched on him a ton. I know we both kind of feel like he's a pretty easy non-tender candidate coming up, but Could he? I mean, do you think that he projects as a potential platoon side first base bat? I know that's not exactly what you're looking for when you're asking for a big offensive producer out of the first base position to be competitive, but I think that Larnick could maybe hold up as a decentish platoon bat at first base, and for 4 million, I think that's something the Twins should explore.
Okay, but the thing with Larnick is that he was a 102 WRC plus last year. Like he was a league average bat, and that's as pretty much as a platoon guy, not seeing a ton of time against lefties. And now, if you're asking him to play out of position, learn how to play first base, it's like it's a lot of hoops to jump through to pay a guy $5 million to be a replacement level bat at a position he's unfamiliar with. Moving on to trade talks. Earlier, we mentioned that Falvey had said that they're not currently in conversations to move either Joe Ryan or Pablo Lopez. What do you think about that? Is that a good move for the Twins, or would you be looking to maximize the value for those last couple years that they're under contract?
I'm taking a very split approach to this, mainly because I like to believe that if we keep Joe Ryan around, we're going to be able to extend him, keep him in Minnesota, give him the deal that he deserves to be our front end starter for the next decade. But on Pablo's end, I'm just not seeing it add up. He has been great, obviously, when he's been healthy, but he missed a large portion of last year. He'll be into his early 30s by the time his deal is up. And I don't necessarily think that he's going to bring us as much value with that 24 million price tag as we could get from trading him and then reinvesting that 24 million. So when we look at both of them as a package, if it's all or nothing, I would prefer that they stay. But after talking about it all year, I've really kind of sold myself on the Twins shipping out Pablo this offseason.
Yeah, I kind of have the opposite thought. So the Twins, I think one of them should be traded, but I think that Joe Ryan would bring back a much larger package and trade just because he is cheaper, he is younger, and he's coming off a better season. And so for me, I would trade Joe Ryan, look to maximize the return, aim primarily for young big league hitters. The guy that I keep bringing up every time we talk about this is the Boston Red Sox and Tristan Casas. Sounds like the Red Sox are going to pursue a new long-term first baseman. They're going to be hot on the heels of guys like Naylor and Pete Alonso. So I could see a situation where they bring in a first baseman. They still have Masataka Yoshida as their primary DH. They can't really move his deal, and they trade Tristan Casas as part of a package for pitching. I would love to trade Joe Ryan for Casas and some other offensive prospects. And then you can roll into next year still with a rotation headlined by Pablo and Ober, with SWR, Zebby, Taj Bradley, Mick Abel, Matt Festa, all those guys getting an opportunity to start. And it would really infuse some life into the offensive side of the ball. And then you can just spend all of the money that you have this offseason on the bullpen and a backup catcher.
Now, I know it's a bit fair to judge Casas off of his last season's production because he was hurt and playing through injury for most of it. But I am still firmly of the belief that if the Twins are trading Joe Ryan, you need a better centerpiece to the deal than Tristan Casas. If it could be like a Jaron Duran and Tristan Casas, I would be all over that. I would sign up for that in a heartbeat. But if we're looking at Casas as a centerpiece for a trade return, I am not a fan of the Twins making that deal for Joe Ryan. I have been hammering the table to go across state lines and talk to the New York Yankees, who are always buying, always need more talent, have the pocketbooks to open up their checking account as soon as they would get Joe Ryan and give him whatever deal they want. And they also conveniently have a much more palatable Ben Rice at first base, who I understand is a pretty lofty asking price, But we're talking about Joe Ryan, who before he tailed off a bit in September was a legitimate Cy Young candidate type of player. And the Yankees have also continue to show this weird hesitation with trusting their younger guys in large moments. We've seen it with Dominguez as well. Both him and Rice were not starting for multiple of those ALDS matchups, I believe. I don't really understand what's in it for the Yankees. I don't understand why they keep doing this, but I think it's a consistent enough pattern for long enough time to suggest that I think Ben Rice might be more tradable in the Yankees' eyes than a lot of us would think.
If Ben Rice is in any way available, I don't care what it takes. I would love Ben Rice on the Twins. Like I would trade Joe Ryan straight up for Ben Rice right now. Ben Rice is coming off of a phenomenal year with the bat. His underlying metrics are even better. I think his ex WOBA was like puts him among like the top 15 hitters in baseball. He's a monster who can also play like a reasonable catcher if you need him to. I think I would be so happy with Ben Rice in this lineup. Otherwise, like we talked about a couple episodes ago, I think there's a lot of potential landing spots for these guys. It's just all about whether you want to seek your upgrades through a larger package, which you would with Joe Ryan, or if you want to get a more modest package and then be able to reinvest the money that you're saving on Pablo Lopez. So I think I could see either side, but in my mind, the poll ads haven't shown a willingness to reinvest money that they're saving on contracts. I mean, if we're talking about saving $20 million and then respending it, theoretically we should already be doing that with Carlos Correa's deal, and we're not sure that that's going to happen. And so I would rather just prioritize the players that we're getting back in a trade and going for a big package with Joe Ryan. And I will say the Red Sox, I don't think Casas would be the headliner, especially because he only has 3 years of control versus Joe Ryan's two, and he plays a less valuable position, and he's not been as good of a player. But as kind of a co-headliner or like the second piece in the deal, I could see him with one of the Red Sox young pitchers like Connolly Early being an interesting package. Or the Red Sox have a lot of like high upside infield prospects. Obviously, we've seen Marcelo Meyer, Christian Campbell, Sanon Rafaela, although he should probably play center field. All of those guys have come up in the last few years, and they have a pretty full infield picture. But they also have a couple of lower minors, high upside shortstops who are drawing some love in the top half of those top 100 prospect lists. I think we could see a kind of deal like we saw with Duran, where we get one big leaguer and another top prospect who's further away, and we get one of those shortstops and Casas or Early or whatever.
I definitely think that major leaguer prospect type of package fits everybody's boxes in terms of needs because it would keep our salary down for the present day, keep the poll ads happy, and it's also getting us to fair value in a trade overall. But I'm kind of circling back to the whole idea of trading these guys in the first place. And I feel like if the Twins are truly intent on competing this year, on trying to stay in the division race, and on being the best team on paper they can this year, I ultimately, after talking through all these trade talks and listening to it, feel like the Twins' most immediate path forward to success would be just keeping both these guys on the roster. I think it's the most sure thing the Twins have in terms of value, and I think that it does the most in terms of opening up opportunities to backfill the bullpen with some of these younger arms that we thought might need to be in the rotation with Lopez and Ryan out. It does the most in terms of letting us spend our money elsewhere in free agency because if we end up dealing Pablo or Joe Ryan, they would presumably try to bring in at least one veteran option to compete with all these younger guys. And even just a middling starting pitcher on the free agent market's going to command significantly more money than a middling free agent from anywhere else. So I think from a 1 year competitive build, I would still lean towards keeping both these guys on the roster for next year.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to subtract a frontline starter and then claim that you're better. But I will say that the Twins probably don't need to bring in a veteran free agent just because they have so many options post deadline for starters. Like, if you took one of those two out, if you say Pablo Lopez and Joe Ryan are going to have one spot and the other one's going to get traded, you still have Ober as your starting pitcher, too. Then you have SWR, Zebby, and Festa. That rounds out your five. And then you also have Mick Abel, Taj Bradley. Um, you have Mick Abel, Taj Bradley, guys like Kendry Rojas and Andrew Morris, and Marco Raya in the minors, as well as some other guys who probably shouldn't be starters, but are kind of starter reliever types in Corey Lewis, CJ Culpepper, and like Travis Adams, Pearson Ole, and yes, Connor Prelip. And yeah, a lot of those guys you would prefer to have convert to the bullpen, be one inning guys, probably be more effective. But there's so many of them that I think you could deal one of Pablo or Ryan and just roll with a rotation without having to bring anyone else in.
I think my counterpoint to that is that we have so many openings in the bullpen that we could put every single one of those guys we just mentioned, Adams and Ole and Rojas when he's ready and Prelip when he's ready. And I think even a guy like Taj Bradley, I mean, we've seen it at the major league level for about 5 years now, I believe, and we've seen it with the Twins for about 5 or 10 starts. And in neither situation has he looked like he's anything more than a middle to back end of the rotation type of guy. So my thought is that if you really want to be competitive, you want your proven commodities in your rotation, and that would include bringing in another sturdy veteran to really stabilize this rotation so that even if he's not going to be an ace, he's not going to be your postseason hero. He's a guy that can consistently eat innings through the season. So when you have your McAbels and Taj Bradleys having blow up starts where they only get through 3 innings, you have that stable hand that you can turn to and say, all right, it's time to eat. You're up next.
I think the counterpoint to that is just from like a resource balancing standpoint. Like, so much of the Twins' talent is on the pitching end. Like, we're talking about how we have Mick Abel and Taj Bradley as like our seventh and eighth options, and we have legitimately only Cody Clemens who can play first base. So it's in my mind, it's like, yes, these guys are less proven. There's a greater chance that they're not all that good, but we have a bunch of them, so we can take shots and maybe one of them hits in that fifth starter spot that we open from trading Pablo or Joe. And if we can trade one of those guys and get a proven big league hitter and some more prospect capital, it's like, well, we're probably a better team because only five of these guys can be in the rotation. And if you're moving a guy who could start to the bullpen, you're automatically reducing his value. I mean, there's a reason that teams try for so long to keep guys as starters. So I think if we're just going to say, well, we should keep all of them because we have bullpen spots open, it's like, well, we'd be better off trading from some of our starting pitching depth, getting a hitter, and then just going out and signing relievers to short-term deals. In my mind, that makes more sense.
I do think it really depends on what we do in the trade market. If we do keep both Pablo and Joe, we definitely don't need to bring in a veteran pitcher. But in that case, we would just use the money on a first baseman. Where if we deal one of them, we'd presumably have the spot open, or we would fill the spot at first base with the talent that we pick up in the trade. But I don't really like the idea of keeping guys around as starters just to pump up their trade value, mainly because so many of these guys are so young that they can kind of dance between being starters and being bullpen for a year and give us more of a clear direction to our future. You know, if we want to start with Taj Bradley and Connor Prelip and Mick Abel all in our bullpen to start the year, I'm fine with that because if we hit the trade deadline and this team sucks again and we're selling again, then you move Pablo and you move Joe Ryan and you have the room to now put those guys, build them back up into the starting rotation. And in the meantime, they get more downtime. They're pitching less in the bullpen, which would give them more opportunity to work with this Twins pitching staff, these coaches, to try to improve their games and make the adjustments that the Twins coaching staff wants out of them.
Yeah, I would just say like because we got a lot of these arms back by trading away relievers, it just doesn't to me make a lot of sense to be like, oh yeah, we traded you know, we traded Griffin Jacks for Taj Bradley, and now Taj Bradley's going to be a reliever, and we hope he turns into Griffin Jacks. It's like at that point, like, what are we doing here? Like, we probably traded for this guy thinking he could be a starter because that's going to be more valuable than a back end reliever. And I think as a parachute, like break glass in case of emergency option, like, yeah, it's nice to have in your back pocket that this guy could be a reliever, but like you make that trade because you think he's going to be an impact starter.
And I have no problem if they want Taj Bradley and McAbel in the rotation, but after those deals, even if we trade Pablo and or Joe, there's going to be so many arms to put on the major league roster that need to be like they're done with AAA. They've shown everything they need to. They're ready to be in the majors. If it's not Taj Bradley and Mick Abel, it's going to be Andrew Morris and Marco Raya and David Festa. I
Which
think that we just have to be aggressive in getting these pitchers to the major league level, no matter how they get there.
Yeah, and I would definitely agree with some of those guys you brought up. I think, in my mind, the Andrew Morris, the Culpepper, uh, Travis Adams, Pearson, all of those guys are kind of marginal starting pitching prospects. Like they're like, yeah, this guy could probably be a fourth or fifth starter on a lot of teams, but that's not super helpful for the Twins because the Twins have so many guys who are capable of that right now and have upside to be more. So I think those guys moving into the bullpen makes sense. I would just say the pitchers that have the upside of being an impact starting pitcher, I'm just not ready to give up on yet. Even if it means that two of them start the year in the minors, I think that's worthwhile, especially because you know you're going to have starting pitching injuries, and being able to just bring up another high upside young arm is going to be valuable.
I am kind of just struggling still with identifying who is our high upside arms because everything you just said about Taj Bradley and trading Griffin Jacks for him and it not making sense to immediately just try and turn Taj Bradley back into Griffin Jacks makes sense. But ultimately, I mean, from my perspective, I'm not the man who made the trade. I still don't believe in Taj Bradley in that way. We can go back to the deadline if we want and talk about the other options the Twins had. But at the end of the day, I think especially in Bradley's case over Abel, just because Bradley's had a lot more major league time, that he shouldn't be guaranteed any sort of role just because we gave up a massive piece of our bullpen for him. Is that a bad look for the Twins? Yeah, I understand that would be really hard for Derek Falvey to stomach. It would be a bad look for him. It's something that will definitely play into his consideration when we're filling out the roster and our roles for next year. But just on a purely decision based decision, I think that Taj Bradley is more towards the middle of the pack of all of these potential starters we have in terms of upside. And I am not really stressing out over getting him into our rotation this year.
Yeah, I mean, I see that point. In general, I think where I'm at is that the Twins have a lot of good starting pitchers, or at least starting pitchers that you think have upside. Whether or not they trade Pablo Lopez and Joe Ryan, I feel really good about our group of starters. I think it has as much upside as any group that the Twins have had. The bullpen remains a massive concern. And so I think part of how good you feel about the starting pitchers depends on what the Twins do for their bullpen. Because if they go out and sign 3 or 4 decent relievers to fill out the majority of the bullpen, and we're just moving, the Travis Adams, Pearson All, maybe Connor Prelip to the pen. You're not depleting your starting pitching. You still have a reasonably good group in the bullpen, and you feel good about our pitching staff in general. But I think really where I'm coming to is my confidence in this Twins team is going to directly correlate with how much money they spend. If they have $130 million payroll, I feel okay about them being a wild card team. If they have $150 million payroll, they could be a division contender. If they do probably the more likely route and they have a $110 million payroll, then I think it's going to be a struggle to get to 500. And it really just depends on how much the poll ads and these new minority owners are willing to spend. I don't know. I think until we get clarity on that situation, it's hard to say what the Twins are going to do and if they're going to be any good this year.
I certainly agree, and I think the unfortunate answer for us as fans is that we're not going to find out this offseason. To me, when the Twins talk about being competitive this year, I think it's really going to come down to July. I think they can talk all they want about adding, staying competitive, being a good team coming into 2026. At the end of the day, everybody already knows that, like you said, they're not going to push probably past that 110, 120 million if we're really optimistic number this offseason, because the team didn't show them anything that should suggest they should. Like if this new look Twins is going to put 120, $130 million payroll on the high end, I think we're going to kind of have to come out here in the front half of the season and prove that we're a good enough team to justify adding, because we certainly have the talent in the upper minor leagues and recently graduated the majors players that we could go back out and reinvest at this trade deadline if we're good enough to do that. But I think we have to be good enough to do that in the first place, which is part of why I'm a fan of pushing as many of these upper minors arms that haven't seen the major leagues yet to the bullpen, because I think if we want to preach being a good team, that's going to be the biggest step we can take in the offseason.
Yeah, I think I don't know. My thoughts on this team is just getting more and more frustrating to me, just because I look at this roster and I'm like, it is not hard to turn this into a contender. If you go out and sign a big bat at first base, like if you say, like let's say they get Eugenio Suarez to be their new first baseman, 3 years, 65 million, throw him at first. That gets you to 110 million. If you're going up to like 130, 150, that gives you so much room to add a backup catcher, a backup shortstop, and relievers. So let's say that Suarez is your big addition at first. You could roll into next season with Keishel leading off, playing second, Buxton hitting second in center, and then you could go Wallner in right, Eugenio Suarez at first. You can say Jeffers is going to hit fifth and catch. Royce Lewis is going to bat sixth. And then the bottom three in your order is going to be Brooks Lee and then your 2 corner outfielders. So that could be Erod and Jenkins by midseason. You could have Austin Martin. You could have Alan Roden. You could have any of these guys. But it gives you a lot of flexibility. You only have one below average hitter in your lineup, being Brooks Lee, and he's playing the most important position defensively. And then the other two pieces that you could have there are potential impact corner bats. I think if you do that, you can squint at that lineup and say, this is a team that can be playoff bound. This is a team that can score an above average number of runs. The defense might not be great, but they can actually hit the ball. And then you can also go and spend some money on some relievers. You can bring in, maybe a 1 year, $10, $15 million closer. If you want to play on the high end, you could go give $15 million on a 1 year deal to Devin Williams or Ryan Helsley and just be like, all right, hopefully this guy is just the best reliever in baseball again. And if it doesn't work out, it's a 1 year deal. and then you go sign a Danny Coulomb, you go sign Phil Maton, whoever. Insert random secondary setup man that'll make $5 million this year, and you just spend 25 million in the bullpen, and you sign a $5 million backup catcher. Okay, you just spent $50 million for this year. Your payroll is 140. It's still $15 million less than it was in 2023, and you have a viable bullpen. You have a lineup that can score runs. You have a decent backup catcher. You kept your rotation intact. You have a ton of depth for injuries on the pitching side. Like, it's not that hard to imagine the Twins being a good team if they just spend any money at all. But it's hard to have faith that they're going to spend money. And this whole offseason, they've just said, oh, well, we'll have that conversation. We still need to talk to ownership. We'll get that direction. It's like, my guy, it is the GM meetings. The winter meetings is in 3 weeks. The moves are happening now. If you don't know what's happening, what have you been doing since July? You haven't had anything to look forward to since July 31st. And the season ended almost 2 months ago. If you don't know what the direction is, that's on you. That's my soapbox rant.
I'm glad that you were able to get that one out. I could tell that it's been boiling for a while. Definitely needed that one as a fan. I wonder on your last question there about what the hell exactly Falvey is doing, figuring out his direction and what they're going into this offseason. If that's really his fault, though, or if it is the Pohlads fiddling with the team again, because by all means, we should not be trying to be good right now. The Pohlads made it very clear they wanted salary slashed. Falvey went through, he did that. We already had a good team. We had a team that, again, for about a month and a half of 2025 was one of the best teams in baseball. Before Pablo went down, before Keishel went down. We've talked about it during last season. I still believe that the Twins are closer to winning the division title than they are to being the worst team in baseball if Pablo and Keishel could have stayed healthy for the entire season. That being said, it kind of feels like we weren't trying to be good this offseason, that Falvey was ready to make this a long-term rebuild, that he was committed to multiple years of sitting through the suck, and the Pohlads just came right back in this offseason, and as they've done in a lot of past years, said, I don't care if you just traded away the entire team because we told you to. We're now telling you that we want to be good again.
I think not spending the last few years is even more of an indication they're not going to spend now. Like, they couldn't spend $15 million on a first baseman when they were actually good and had a full bullpen and had a lot of good, young, cheap contributors across the board. Like, the last 3 years, we've been saying they need to sign a first baseman. They need to sign a first baseman. And the best option they brought in recently was Carlos Santana on a 1 year, like $6 million deal at like age 38, coming off of a terrible season. They've just been rolling out there a $1 million Ty France, a $3 million Donovan Solano. Like, it's not the kind of moves you make as a team who wants to compete. They're building a solid nucleus and then doing nothing to surround them. Like, they just look at their team and they go, yeah, that's like an 82, 83 win team. Let's not help them at all. Let's not fill the easiest position on the field to fill. Let's not go pursue any reasonable upgrades. Like, they don't do anything to try to compete. It feels like they just get to a place where they're an 82 win team and they go, it's good enough. If we have some variance on our side, we can get to 90 wins. That'd be pretty cool.
I'm going to push back on that slightly. I agree to an extent that that's how they've treated these past few off seasons. But if we look at some of these recent Twins trade deadlines before 25, it was, I believe, 23 that they added Tyler Mahle.
That was 22, I think.
Oh, wow. It was 22. And
23 was the Jorge Lopez for Dylan Floro deadline, and that's the only move they did.
I could have sworn that Lopez and Tyler Mahle were in the same trade deadline. But in
Yeah,
either
they were.
way,
That was 22, but then the 23 deadline was when they traded away Jorge Lopez for Dylan Floro. And then
that's right.
2024
So
was the Trevor Richards deadline.
the point being, when the Twins have tried to go for it at the trade deadline, tried to take this middle of the pack 80, 85 ish win team and add to it, it just consistently has not turned out well for them. You talk about wanting to fill your first base with a solid impact bat. We could just have Spencer Steer there right now. He was already almost at the major league level. Same thing with Christian Encarnacion Strand. I understand that neither of them are exactly lighting it up as all stars in this league, but I think that there's reason for the Twins to be kind of hesitant with going all in, especially in a trade manner, when they just haven't really shown the ability to land on those trades.
I mean, I will say that I think a lot of times trades are perceived as bad deals when people don't even look at like how the other guys are performing. Like you can see the guy that we acquired didn't play well, so it's like this was a bad trade. But in the Tyler Mahle trade, for example, last year Spencer Steer was worth 0.7 WAR by Baseball Reference and had a 723 OPS while being one of the worst defenders in baseball. So like, yeah, you could put him at first base, but he's producing at the same level as like Cody Clemens. And then Christian Encarnacion Strand was worth negative zero point 0.6 WAR last year. He had a 610 OPS while playing pretty much exclusively first base. And so, like, neither of those guys are any good. Cade Povich was the main piece that we gave up to get Jorge Lopez, and he doesn't have a good enough fastball to succeed at the big leagues. He's getting rocked every time he goes out there. And it's just like these are guys who had some steam when we traded them. They were good prospects, but like they haven't worked out for their teams. Neither of the guys we acquired. I feel like it's a net neutral. And to use that as an example of like, well, it didn't work out, so we should just sit on our hands. I mean, you got to do something. Like this didn't work out, but didn't work out for them either. So take more swings.
I do appreciate that they have at least taken swings in the past, because that's something that I think we've been lacking recently. But I don't like the idea of them taking these half-hearted swings, which is what I think they would be limited to this off season. Because you definitely make a great point about the whole Tyler Mahle trade maybe just kind of being a net loss for everybody involved, where nobody really did anything good. That's also because we were dealing at a pretty middling level, both in terms of Tyler Mahle not exactly being a premier ace that was available that trade deadline, and Spencer Steer and Encarnacion Strand being less of like really highly touted prospects, more just guys that at the time were close to major league ready, but didn't have a very clear path forward on the Twins. And in the same way that we traded Cade Povich, he was a young, somewhat promising arm who was a fair return for a guy like Jorge Lopez, who was having a pretty good, borderline spectacular season when we traded for him, with very little previous success to suggest that he could keep it up. I just think that the Twins have frequently dealt in the land of half-heartedness, and with their pretty firm monetary cap looming over them this year, I don't see them being able to make a deal that would get out of that.
I will say, like, there's an ability to add impact players without adding large salaries. Like, just like how the Twins dealt away pre-arb and arbitration guys at the deadline, which teams that are always moving those players, they're expensive. You have to give up a lot to get them. But there's nothing to say that the Twins couldn't use what is a top 5 farm system in the league to go out and get, I don't know, an impact bat somewhere. You know, the Diamondbacks currently, this is a bad example because Ketel Marte is making decent money, but Ketel Marte is available. He's a switch hitter. He mashes. He plays second base, a place where you have a giant hole, especially if you don't think Keishel's a viable defender there. There's no reason that the Twins, if they're really wanting to compete, couldn't go out and trade from their minor league depth get an impact bat at second base. And he's on a team friendly deal. Yeah, it's what, 15, 20 million he's making a year, but he's the best second baseman in baseball. He mashes, middle of the order guy, switch hitter, and you say, now we have a good offense. Or, I mean,
I
you could make the same argument to go out and get a Casas, to go get Mark Vientos, even say, oh, this guy has been good. He had a rough year. Let's buy low. We'll trade some prospect capital. Mark Vientos is our first baseman.
My issue with that is it just feels directionless, and that might just be where the Twins are at right now. But why would we be taking this farm system that we just built up at the trade deadline and trying to immediately cash it in for players that are making the same amount of money we just offloaded at the deadline? Maybe you could point to it and say, yeah, well, we traded away a bunch of relievers. Relievers are a lot less sticky in terms of value and ability to replace, where you can say, okay, we shuffled basically the value on our team out of our bullpen and into more pressing needs. But to me, it just feels like we're taking one step forward and one step back. It's not even necessarily hurting us, we're just not going anywhere by doing that.
Yeah, I would argue that that's more of an issue of who the Twins targeted at the deadline. Because I think you could have looked at this Twins team and said, all right, we have a couple of decent young players in the big leagues. Largely, Luke Keishel's the one you feel good about. Wallner, yeah, to a lesser extent, and same with like Brooks Lee and Royce Lewis. But you can look and say, all right, well, we have all these young pitchers coming up, and we have Erod and Jenkins still in the minors. We have Culpepper, just drafted Merrick Houston. We are going to be bringing in Eduardo Tayit. We have a lot of young guys. We could say our core is really going to be in the big leagues in 2 or 3 years, and we're just going to maximize prospect value. But if you're doing that, then why are you trading Brock Stewart for James Outman? Why are you pursuing a big league bat in your deals with Varlin and with Duran, trying to get Mick Abel and trying to get Alan Roden and also Kendry Rojas, who's in AAA? Why are you trading for guys who can play now when you don't expect to be good now, and you could add higher upside options that'll be good when maybe the rest of your core is also up? It's like they're not willing to wait a couple years, but they're also not willing to invest for now. And so it's like if you go back to their deadline moves, it's like they've been directionless. Like accumulate value in one window or another. Don't be like, we'll be mediocre for 5 years. Like that doesn't help anyone.
I see where you're coming from, but I feel like the major league like ready talents that they added at the deadline generally still fall under that prospect umbrella. I know it's something that Gleeman talks about a lot when you look at a team's future, that guys could come up and play 40 games in the major leagues. They're no longer a prospect. They don't count towards your farm system. That doesn't mean that they're not a part of your future. I don't hate the Twins targeting guys like Micah Bell and Alan Roden and even Taj Bradley if they really believe that they still have some good upside to tap into. And I also don't really feel like trading Brock Stewart for James Outman is that much of a loss. When you look at it, Brock Stewart was fantastic, yes. Had a lot of injury concerns, a lot of injury concerns that we ended up seeing materialize with the Dodgers. I think that kind of stands as an outlier trade in terms of trading for major league talent at the deadline last year, whereas the rest of the trades at least were kind of directional on the idea that your Kendry Rojas, even the I forget the names of the two guys we got for Bader, but the outfielder that we picked up for Bader.
Hendry Mendez.
Yep. Who was playing at Double A, I believe, or maybe High A ball with the Phillies. But either way, ended last year in Double A with the Twins. Also having a pretty good year. I think that they have kind of put themselves into that 2 to 3 years down the line window with a lot of those moves. And that just kind of makes their sudden 180 into, yeah, no, we're going to be good this year. We're going to compete this year. Just all the more frustrating as a fan.
Yeah, I also think if you want to be like, oh, we'll be okay this year, we think we can be a borderline contender, but really our window's down the line. That's all the more reason to look at trades for Pablo and Joe Ryan because they're only here for 2 more years. And so if you don't think you're going to be a division contender this year, you're losing value just by having them play out their contract. To not say anything of the possibility that they get hurt and then they've lost all value. So I think if anything, trading those guys away and then bringing in more controllable, high upside talent, especially on the offensive side of the ball, and playing out those young starters who you've just acquired in the rotation gives you a lot more upside and also a lot less downside because even if they're not great this year, you have much more control and a lot less ability to lose value with one of those pitchers just getting hurt.
No, I definitely agree. I think it's kind of surprising that they've come out and already so strongly talked about keeping Pablo and Joe Ryan this offseason. Not something I necessarily agree with, but if we do want to kind of put a bow on this news, look at it a little bit more cheery, what would Pablo and Joe Ryan's future look like with the Twins then going forward? Obviously, they're at two very different stages of their careers. So, what do you think long term deals could look like for both these guys going forward?
I think there's a chance that you could extend Pablo because he's already making decent money. He has 2 years left. His contract ends after his age 31 season. I think you could probably go to Pablo and say, "Hey, we want to add 3 years and 100 million onto the end of your deal, and essentially turn the next 5 years into like a 5 year 150 contract." And then that takes Pablo through his age 35 season. He's making an average of like 30 million a year. That's lower than we've seen pitchers of his caliber go for as free agents. He's going to be younger than a lot of those free agent arms. I think that could make a lot of sense. But that also, if you're the Twins, is locking up Pablo. You're not going to be able to trade him for any value now. And you're going to try to compete for those 5 years, which right now it looks like half of it they won't. And then for Joe Ryan, honestly, at this point, I think he's going to be holding out, looking for, I don't know, 6, 7 years and 150 to 200 million. And also is a younger guy who probably is going to look to go somewhere where he can compete. And so I think it's probably unlikely that the Twins are going to be able to extend Joe Ryan.
I think if you're talking about him looking for a place to compete, though, that's the one place that this all makes sense. The Twins' direction, everything moving forward, it kind of falls into the same bucket as Byron Buxton, who we've started to hear the whispers of softening on his stance on his no trade clause and maybe being at a point where he'd even flip his opinion and ask for a trade if we continue to subtract. I do think, as we kind of pointed out, there's enough pieces here for the Twins to get competitive in another year or two, and that would be kind of melding together everything they've been building where they're able to keep the veterans that are left and keep them happy by staying relatively competitive while still looking at more of a 3 to 4 year window.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, a lot of this is looking like half measures. They're kind of directionless. Like they're trying to be okay now and good in the future. It's a lot of the same battles that all small market teams fall into, where it's like, we want to be competitive year in and year out. Fan bases hate rebuilds. It's not good for your organization to be uncompetitive for whole seasons. And the Twins, even when they've had bad rosters, have always added along the edges with Derek Falvey, brought in guys, and at least tried to field a competitive team. And I think that makes sense. It's just kind of the frustration that comes with all small markets. and that they don't have the payroll to really supplement their roster as they should. And so they're just kind of stuck in a weird middle ground where they have legitimately like a third of the resources of the Dodgers to try to field a team to compete with them. And that's just such a big limitation that it's hard to overcome. And that's what makes it even more frustrating to see the Twins go from being an average ish payroll to being a bottom 7 or 8 payroll in the league. If they had like an average payroll this year will probably be 180, 190 million. If they had just kept up with an average payroll and you could go and spend, $100 million, $90 million to this team, they would be good. Like their young, controllable core or their team friendly contracts are in a good enough spot where if they just had the money to supplement the team, like even an average organization, they would be a really good team and be competitive. But they don't have that, and it's unclear when they're ever going to have that. And so it's hard to feel great about this team outside of having just a young core come up and be really good, which is hard to develop.
I think you really just nailed that right on the head. It's kind of depressing, but it is the state that the Twins have been living in for the past few years. So before we move on, I'd like to drop one little nugget of positivity, a little bit of hope into all of our Twins fans' lives. We're looking at, as we've been talking about, 2, 3, 4 year window to really being competitive. I don't know that the Polads are still set on keeping this team. I think that these minority investors, as much as anything, just got them out of the debt that they're so desperately trying to get rid of, apparently. This is definitely just going back to the wishing well, and there's been no whispers, rumors that I've heard of at least that they could still be willing to sell. But if they were talking about it once, we could always dream that in 2 to 3 years down the line, when they've had more time to think about it, and as the team is hopefully getting better and becoming a more positive asset, that right as we're hitting our stride with these young guys, the Polads are finally willing to sell again, and it could all click right at once.
Yeah, that is the hope. I mean, probably the biggest hope for Twins fans is that the Polads continue to lose money in their real estate investments. More debt, baby. Sell more of the team to pay for it. Let's go. Next, I think we want to talk about the Twins outfield and a lot of their hitters that could be available, could be looking for playing time. We heard another note coming out of the GM meetings that a lot of teams are searching for everyday left-handed hitting outfielders, and the Twins have a few that could be of interest. I think we touched on earlier how we think Trevor Larnach is probably not going to be on the Twins next year. So I think I'm curious what your thoughts are. What kind of trade return we could expect for Larnach, or if we think he's just a non-tender candidate.
I have been saying for a while that I would like to believe Larnach will still hold value to somebody as a platoon bat in the corner outfield. Sounds like left-handed hitting is kind of hot at the GM meetings, which would make sense because for a normal team, left-handed hitting is kind of harder to pick up. There's a lot less talent just naturally from the left side. The Twins just like to put themselves into these weird predicaments. But while I do think Larnach holds some value, I think people are also pretty realistic. They know that the Twins have a logjam in left field and that Larnach is not really part of their future plans anymore and is a pretty big non-tender candidate. So to me, any sort of Larnach trade would really just revolve around a team that believes so firmly in Larnach that they're willing to give up a small piece to jump the line in waivers essentially and make sure that they get Larnach. To me, I think if we're lucky, we're looking at a Harrison Bader-esque return for Larnach.
Yeah, I think the comp I have been looking at for a Larnach trade is something like the Nick Gordon for Steven Okert trade a few years ago. Just get a functional middle reliever for him. It's not going to be anyone special. But just a guy who can throw decent innings in our bullpen. Back then, that was helpful because we needed a second lefty behind Thielbar. But like even now, a functional reliever goes such a long way for the Twins, especially one who's cheap and controllable. If they just added a guy, that'd be cool.
I will say that a Steven Oker type is pretty findable through free agency, through pretty much all the offseason. The one thing I do kind of think about with the Larnick trade is that if we do end up trading him, if we were to trade him for a more mid tier prospect, it would potentially open up another spot on the 40-man roster, which is something that the Twins already don't need to be super worried about. They only have 33 guys there right now. They have 7 open spots. But if they want to continue to put themselves in a position to be flexible entering this offseason and to build talent at the major league level on their terms, I think there's some value in trying to focus on a minor league return for Larnick just so that we can say, hey, we now have another spot. That's maybe another guy that we can protect from the Rule 5 draft, a guy that we could or a spot we could potentially use in a multiplayer deal, like we talked about. If we could trade Joe Ryan or Pablo for a few different guys from that Red Sox organization, and if we get to January, late January, early February, and we still have a plethora of 40-man spots and needs in the bullpen, you could go out and just sign a Steven Okert type and hope that he turns into more of a Danny Coulomb.
Yeah, I will say the Twins, like you said, have 33 guys on their 40 man, but they also have the ability to create some more spots, and would be a little bit surprised if they don't, because they still have Mickey Gasper, Eddie Julian, Carson McCusker, Outman, as well as Topa. I don't know if they're going to offer him a contract. They declined his option, so I'm thinking probably not. Johnny Pareda could also be a guy that gets DFA'd. They also have Ryan Fitzgerald, Deshaun Kersey. I think there's a lot of ability to open up 40-man spots. So I don't know that that's specifically going to drive their thinking, but I do think that the Twins could pursue a lot of guys who are on the 40-man bubble from other teams and be really active in the waiver wire over the next month or so.
That would definitely fit in with their kind of focus on staying more competitive this year. I was thinking about that earlier this morning as we were getting ready for the pod, about that half a year where Akil Baddoo set the Twins on fire. I certainly expect the Twins to make a few additions on kind of those fringe guys. I know a lot of teams don't pick up more than one or two guys from the 40 man or from the Rule 5 draft, but I think that anytime you can trim the fat on your roster for guys that are at pretty much a replacement level in the first place, you may as well, because even if you don't end up finding a better use for their spot, it's not that hard to go out and replace their production.
Yeah, agreed. While we're talking about the 40 man protection deadline, I think, is on Tuesday. So it's
Sure
only a
is.
couple days away. The Twins have, I think, 8 guys who need protected. Otherwise, it looks like they have 10 guys. 10 guys who need protected in their top 30 prospects. Otherwise, they'll be available. So I'll run through the list quick. They have Kendry Rojas, Gabby Gonzalez, Connor Prelip, CJ Culpepper, Andrew Morris, Jose Olivares, Hendry Mendez, Ricardo Olivar, Kalai Rosario, and Danny De Andrade. Of this group, I think there's a lot of slam dunk guys that are going to be protected. They're going to keep Rojas, Gonzalez, and Prelip. But I would also expect that they will protect CJ Culpepper and Andrew Morris, just because they're upper minors, starting pitchers. They're going to be the easiest guys for a team to scoop up, and they're probably a serviceable 5th starter right now that could have more upside in the bullpen. And then Hendry Mendez, I think, is another guy that they keep just because they just traded for him. He's having a decent season. And you could make the case for Ricardo Olivar, just because they have no catchers in the org. What are your thoughts, Eric?
Yeah, I think you pretty much smashed that, especially with the no doubters, no brainers. I think there's probably a good five or six guys that are going to definitely Twins won't think twice. I do think there's going to be a lot more discussion on some of these fringe guys. Kalai Rosario, definitely underwhelming from what you would have expected when we drafted him. But he finally might have figured it out. Had a 25 homer, 32 steal season last year at Double A. He's only 23, getting to be on the older end of a prospect. But I think with a season like that, if he isn't a Rule 5 pick, he would definitely start the season at Triple A and have possibility of being one of those early call ups if we need more outfield help before guys like Erod and Jenkins are ready for the show. I guess I wonder how much value do you place in kind of adding these guys to our 40 man just to maintain our organizational depth at the prospect level versus letting them walk, knowing, like I kind of said earlier, that they're guys who could maybe be fringe fourth outfielders, and in that case, we could just get them off the street pretty easily too.
Yeah, so the Rule 5 draft is interesting because it also like anytime a player is picked in the Rule 5 draft, they have to stay on the 26-man roster for the entirety of the following season. Otherwise, they just get offered back to their original team. And so, most often, we see pitchers being taken. Usually, this is like a starting pitcher who they have some faith in long term, and they just can throw at the back end of their bullpen, and that's their mop up long relief guy. Otherwise, teams that are not expected to be really competitive will sometimes take a hard throwing reliever and hope that they can get him in the strike zone or teach him a secondary pitch. And they'll use those guys as their picks. Otherwise, like fourth outfield, there's a center field capable, like speedy guy who can be a defensive replacement or maybe a pinch runner. Those are usually who gets taken in the draft, which is why I think you should protect CJ Culpepper and Andrew Morris, just because those are the archetype of guys who get picked every year. With Hendry Mendez, Ricardo Olivar, and Kalai Rosario, I think you can make the case that they are outside of the guys that usually get protected. Hendry Mendez is more of a corner guy, first baseman. Olivar kind of can catch, probably plays a little bit more corner outfield, and Kalai Rosario is a corner outfielder. Those are guys that are going to be hard to carry on a roster throughout the big league season, especially if they're not hitting, which you wouldn't expect making the jump from Double A. So I think they're kind of borderline cases who I would err on the side of not protecting, but I could definitely see where their upside is tantalizing enough for them to be selected.
I do think every year that the Rule 5 draft comes around that fans especially tend to overrate a lot of the value of their Rule 5 guys and underestimate just how long it is to hold a guy on the 26 man for a full season, especially because if they're a Rule 5 pick, they're already fringy, barely making the roster. I mean, you look at last year, the Twins took Castellano. It was their first Rule 5 pick since 2017, I believe, and he ended up just not making an impact, didn't really pitch for us. I believe we offered him back, did we not?
Yeah, we did. He's with the Phillies
Yep.
now.
And I mean, he was coming off a season where he was the Phillies minor league pitcher of the year. He was, I believe, like 24, 25 at the time, had all the makings to come in and be an actual successful Rule 5 pick. Didn't go anywhere, didn't do anything. So I think that in pursuit of this flexible roster, which the Twins are certainly talking about utilizing this offseason, that I would lean towards not protecting the majority of these guys. I think if there's one guy I want to kind of come down with a harder stance on, it would be Hendry Mendez. just because, as you said, we just traded for him, and then he immediately put up a phenomenal season at Double A for us. Had more walks than he did strikeouts. So clearly, whatever the Twins saw in Mendez that they liked, it worked. They were able to coach him into something. I think he's another guy that will probably, hopefully, start the season at AAA and could be one of those early season reinforcements if we need. But I think at the least that when you brought a guy in that recently and he has shined in the exact way the Twins hoped he would, you've got to be able to, or you got to keep that guy on your organization.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't know that a team would be able to keep him for a full season, but I definitely see where the upside's great enough that someone might try. Um, Outside of that, I think we kind of touched on a little bit Buxton's willingness to waive his no trade clause if the Twins continue to tear it down. I don't know that there's a whole lot of news outside of this. I mean, it's kind of natural human nature. He's an older player. He's the best player on our roster. And if they're not going to build around him, why would he want to stay? I think it's more so like something to monitor going forward, just knowing if the Twins are bad, he could be a guy that gets traded. And also, I didn't realize this, but after 2026, he only has a no trade clause to 5 teams. And so after the season, if the Twins want to trade him, it gets a lot easier. Um, so curious what your thoughts are on that.
Uh, I think that, God forbid, if the Twins ever even try to entertain the idea of a Buxton trade after 26, that we would actually be seeing riots outside of Target Field. I think it was hard enough for a lot of fans to stomach what happened at the deadline. I think that when you have that happen and then you have Byron Buxton, who is a lifelong Twin, come through and give such a consummate professional answer that he has a no trade clause, that he loves Minnesota, he wants to be here, and that's the end of the story. That's all he's going to talk about. You've got to be able to keep that guy on your team and on your roster, because if you can't, who? Like, I get that at some level you need to be realistic about the value he provides over the years that we're trying to compete, but there's just some guys that I think belong in one uniform for life. We saw Joe Mauer sit through a lot of really ugly Twins years at the end of his career. Granted, he was at that point moved down the defensive spectrum to first base. He was more of a all-star-ish at best level hitter for a lot of those last years, and he was a true difference maker. Whether they could have even traded him or not is up for debate, but you never would have even considered it because it's Joe Mauer. And while Buxton hasn't had the career success Joe Mauer has, I think he's had the type of organizational life and career that he deserves to be treated in a similar manner.
Yeah, I mean, Mauer, I think, is a specific case because he's a Minnesotan. He grew up in St. Paul, and Buxton doesn't necessarily have the same ties to Minnesota, but agree that you would like to see Buxton play out the rest of his career with the Twins. And honestly, I think that's still likely the case. Like the most likely outcome is that we just have Buxton here going forward. He plays out this contract as a Twin, but it's something to note. Another thing that happened since our last podcast, the Twins announced the rest of their coaching staff. And so we had speculated that Matt Borgschulte would be back next year. You know, he was only with the Twins for a season. That ended up not being the case. They hired Keith Beauregard from the Tigers to be their new hitting coach. What are your thoughts on that, Eric?
I don't mind the move. I don't think that Borgschulte did anything that really demanded he stay with the team. And I think that Beauregard is a nice pickup. He's been with the Tigers for 3 years, dating through last year, and they've been good. They've taken a lot of promising young guys and brought them into delivering talents. I mean, Riley Green is a perennial all-star. Spencer Torkelson was able to shake off some early career rust to become a pretty bona fide bat in the middle of that lineup. Obviously, Kerry Carpenter has become a bit of a postseason legend, but even a lot of these more borderline guys that have turned into strong everyday players. Zach McKinstry, who's been a solidly above league average bat, hitting from both sides. A guy like Andy Ibanez, who played a pretty big role in their run in 24. I think that Beauregard is a pretty promising hire here for the Twins.
Yeah, I mean, at some point it's hard to distinguish like what is the product of having good players and what's the product of having good coaching. I will say with David Popkins, he left the Twins. The Twins were not hitting well at all. He got fired, goes to Toronto. Toronto immediately becomes the best offense in baseball. And with Matt Borgschulte, he was the coach in Baltimore, and they were one of the better offenses in baseball. He leaves, Baltimore's bats crater. I'm not saying that it's all because of the coaches, but if we're just looking at likely, well, I should say, if we're looking at the correlation between when a coach is there and when a coach is not there, in both cases, history would suggest that those two coaches were doing a good job. And so now firing Borg Schulte and bringing in a third coach in 3 years, it's kind of like why, they have already shaken up the hitting side of the coaching staff, and by all accounts, both of their previous hitting coaches were good at what they do. And so I mean, I don't get too worked up over a hitting coach decision, but it just kind of feels unnecessary.
I would agree that it didn't have to happen, but it kind of felt inevitable, especially if they wanted Pete Mackey back as pitching coach, which it sounds like was more of a focus for the Twins. It's kind of unfair if you're going to fire Baldelli, bring in Derek Shelton, and then not give him any sort of say over his coaching staff. At the end of the day, I think Borg Schulte probably keeps his job if Baldelli does, but when you bring in a new manager, you're going to have pretty sweeping changes to the coaching staff. I think honestly, the fact that the Twins kept as many guys as they did, they kept on Mackey and as well as Trevor Amicone, who was their assistant hitting coach. I think it shows that the Twins necessarily didn't hate the staff they had in place as much as they just understood that with a new manager, they need to give Shelton some agency.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. Some other new hires the Twins brought in are like Grady Sizemore, who's their new outfield and base running, as well as first base coach. I think that's super interesting. Obviously, Sizemore had a great playing career, and then is also has some experience as a manager. He was the interim manager for the White Sox. He's been coaching. I think that's a really solid hire, and I'm excited about that one.
Yeah, I was probably most excited for Grady Sizemore, which is really funny because, like you're talking about, not getting worked up over hitting coach. Not a lot of guys are really going to be turning heads as the first base coach, but I think it's really notable that you were able to take a guy like Grady Sizemore, who had been coaching already for a few years, was well respected enough to get that interim manager role in Chicago to step in at a coaching position like the first base coach. It's a downgrade for Sizemore, obviously, in terms of role, but I think it's something that you're going to bring so much value from a coaching position that normally goes pretty unnoticed that I am still pretty excited for the Grady Sizemore signing there.
Yeah, agreed. I think the last piece of news, and it's not really a Twins thing, it's more of an AL Central thing, but both Emmanuel Clase and Luis Ortiz have now been arrested and are being federally prosecuted for illegal sports betting, which is not great for the Guardians. I mean, it's hard to like be upset about that as a Twins fan. I mean, I generally root on the Guardians' downfall, but pretty eventful stuff there.
I obviously do not condone what happened. It's really bad. Glad it got caught. But there's a lot of laughs, I think, to also be taken from this. My underrated favorite part that has gone pretty underreported. It sounds like this isn't Class A's first year doing this. It sounds like Class A has been involved for at least I think I heard as early as 2023. The guy that really tipped things off, what really set this in motion, is Luis Ortiz. I think there's a really real world where if Ortiz doesn't also get involved in this whole scheme, that maybe it could have gone unnoticed. Maybe they never catch Class A. I would be just so livid if I was Emmanuel Class A and I got nailed for this largely because Luis Ortiz was so bad at being bad that even the MLB had to flag it. Either way, I think the defining numbers here is that Class A already has made 30 million in his career, was well on pace for a nine-figure career. He made 14K from this scheme. He made, I believe the number was 0.01% of his total career earnings doing this. And he's done now. He's not only done playing baseball, he's probably headed to jail.
Yeah, I mean, the level of stupidity is astounding. I mean, they both were on track to be multimillionaires. They're super successful in their careers, and they threw it away for what to them is pocket change. And also, it's the second time that Emmanuel Clase has done something incredibly dumb because he also got popped for PEDs early in his career. It's just like, dude, you could not do more to drag your name through the mud. Like, what are you doing here? So it's really, really interesting. And also, I mean, it sucks for the Guardians too, because they had just traded for Luis Ortiz and they barely got anything out of him. He was, in a roundabout way, the return they got for Andres Jimenez. And yeah, a lot of that was dumping Jimenez and Straw's contracts, but losing a controllable starting pitcher is definitely going to hurt the squad. And when that's in partnership with losing your ultra team friendly deal on the best closer in baseball, it's going to set the Guardians back a ways.
And as you said before, we love to see it. At the end of the day, I sleep just a little bit easier knowing that I'm never going to have to see Emmanuel Clase come out of that Guardians pen again, let alone for the next decade.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, outside of that, I think that's pretty much all of our Twins news for this week. I think the big call out for us is that our podcast is now available on every streaming platform. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, all over the place. So please look for us there. Subscribe, like, do all the stuff that influencers tell you to do. It will help us out a lot. Eric, do you have anything for the people listening before we go?
Nothing for the pod, but I have a little wisdom nugget drop right here. Best alarm I ever set, and I'm reminded of this because it just went off. The 11:45 a.m. on a Sunday alarm. Definitely the move. I have never missed a single lineup set in fantasy football since instituting this alarm. All y'all out there, I'm sure if you're degenerate enough to be digging into a Twins baseball podcast, you're definitely playing some fantasy football. Could be the move.
Yeah, get Keon Coleman out of that lineup. He can't be missing practice. All right. Well, we will be back next week. Like we said, we plan to record on Sunday mornings, drop sometime on Monday or Tuesday. So look for that pretty consistently. And again, feel free to share the pod, like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff.